Meetings, partings, betrayals, and experiences, that's how life unfolds, entangled in the threads of love and infidelity. This story is about complex relationships, about the search for truth and justice in a world where every step can lead to new discoveries and trials. Follow the main character, whose life intertwines with the fate of his wife, leading to unexpected twists and unpredictable decisions. What is pity for you? Have you ever felt sorry for a person personally? Yes, I have felt sorry for people, and I think it's a great feeling, but only if you feel sorry for a person in moderation so that it doesn't cross the line. Unfortunately, you can trust a person and believe in them, but they will lie to you and do their dirty deeds behind your back. So, even when you catch them red-handed, they will resist. I am faced with a terrible situation, and I want to share it. My name is Edward Olson, a 32-year-old man, and I can say that life was not too generous to me in my youth, but I never gave up. Born in a small town where everyone knew each other, I always dreamed of more. My parents worked from morning till night to provide a decent future for me, and I decided not to waste their efforts in vain. Studying was not easy for me, but thanks to perseverance and the desire to prove to everyone and myself that I am capable of more, I graduated from college with honors. This moment became a new chapter for me as right after college, I immediately received an offer from a large company where I began my career. Work took up almost all of my time, but I didn't complain. Success in the professional field gave me confidence, and I began to build my life as I dreamed. I bought a car, then a house. Everything was going according to plan until she appeared in my life, my first wife. We met in college, and it seemed like true love, but she had her own ideas about the future, in which, in her opinion, I could not provide the level of life she desired. It was painful, but her departure made me rethink many things. I realized that my success was not only about money and career, but also about the ability to be happy on my own, independent of someone else's expectations. After the divorce, I became more cautious in relationships. I didn't want to repeat past mistakes, so it took me a long time to allow myself to open up to someone new. Everything changed when I met Rebecca. Our meeting with Rebecca was a coincidence, which I now remember as a fateful moment. It happened in a cafe where I stopped to grab a bite after work. She was sitting at the next table, immersed in textbooks and notes. I couldn't look away. Her concentration and passion were impressive. I was curious about what so captivated a beautiful girl, and I decided to speak up. Our first conversation wasn't about anything special, just an exchange of opinions about cafes, about the weather, but I wanted more. Learning that she was a medical college student, I realized that in front of me was not only an attractive, but also a smart girl. At that moment, I thought I would like to get to know her better. Since then, we started seeing each other more often. I discovered that she had a great sense of humor. She laughed easily and made me laugh too. Her optimism and joie de vivre were contagious, and I gradually realized that I was beginning to fall in love. It felt like breathing fresh air after spending a long time in solitude. We spent more and more time together, and every moment with her seemed special to me. When I suggested she meet my friends and family, she agreed without hesitation. It was an important step for me because the opinions of my loved ones played a significant role. To my surprise, they accepted her as one of their own. Her kindness, openness, and sincerity left them impressed. A month after our first meeting, I realized that I did not want to lose this girl. The decision to propose came spontaneously, but I felt it was the right thing. She accepted, and it was the peak of my joy. Our first months of marriage were like a honeymoon that seemed like it should never end. We were delighted with each other, and every day brought something new and exciting. But as in any fairy tale, there came a moment when reality intervened in our idyllic world. One evening, while we were having dinner, Rebecca suddenly said that her college was sending her on a 3-month internship to another city. I felt my heart squeeze. Distance between us had never been an issue because we had always been together, but now we were facing 3 months of seeing each other only on weekends, if we were lucky. My first reaction was to suggest she decline, but she convinced me of how important it was to her. Then, I offered an alternative to rent an apartment in the city where she was being sent so we could be together. However, Rebecca insisted on living in a dormitory with other students. She convinced me that she would be better off in a circle of like-minded individuals. "It will be hard, but we'll manage, right?" she asked, taking my hands. I nodded, though everything inside me resisted the idea. "Of course, we'll manage. I'll always be there, even if miles physically separate us," I replied, trying to sound confident. We agreed to communicate every day via video call and that I would visit her whenever I could carve out time from my work schedule. Deep down, I hoped those 3 months would fly by unnoticed. Then, the fateful day arrived. I put her on the plane and went home myself. The first week went relatively smoothly. We called each other every evening, sharing news and tidbits from our day. I tried not to show it, but it was hard for me to get used to her absence. Work took up almost all my thoughts, but when I returned home to an empty house, I felt particularly lonely. The second week arrived, and I visited her as we had agreed. We visited several cozy cafes, walked through parks, and even went to the movies. Everything was perfect, and I seemed to have come to terms with the fact that we would have to be apart for an indefinite period. We made love, which I had missed, and the next day, I left. The first alarm bell rang when one day Rebecca suddenly cut off our phone conversation at the 2-minute mark. If before, we could chat for hours via video call, now her calls became shorter, and sometimes she would forget to call at all, citing busyness. I tried to be understanding. After all, she was on an internship, and I didn't want to distract her from her studies. Every day of mine was similar to the previous one, going in circles. I would come home from work, collapse on the sofa, open a bag of chips, and watch a series about a chemistry teacher who took a wrong turn. I passed the time as best I could. 2 months went by like this, and during these 2 months, we managed to meet only 3 times. This week, I was supposed to visit Rebecca, but she decided to cancel our meeting, stating that she was very tired. I was not satisfied with this arrangement, so I called my father and asked for advice. "Edward, you're not a little kid. You have all the means to go to her and make a small surprise. Even if you spend just a minute together, it will be enough, especially since there's only 1 month left," my father said, and I realized he was right. What's stopping me from going to Rebecca? I decided to fly to her for the weekend. Upon arrival, I headed to her dormitory, my heart pounding with impatience. I stood opposite her dormitory and suddenly realized that my hands were shaking as I dialed her number on the phone. I decided to call her, but she was unavailable. Then I waited a few minutes and called again. She answered the phone, and I announced my arrival. Her voice sounded tense, which immediately alarmed me. "I'm here downstairs," I said, trying to hide my disappointment at her reaction as I made my way to her room. Each step felt heavy. All my dreams of a happy meeting began to crumble even before I saw her. The door opened, and I saw Rebecca in a new nightgown that highlighted all her virtues. She looked stunning, but her expression was full of confusion. It seemed to me that I had come at an inconvenient time and was not welcome. I attempted to embrace her, seeking her lips with mine, but she pulled away, pushing me back. "I've missed you so much. Maybe we should go to a hotel." My heart froze. "What's the problem?" I asked, not understanding what was happening. "I'm tired of sitting here within these 4 walls and want to get some fresh air," she said casually. "And why are you alone in the room?" I suddenly asked, because she was indeed alone. "My roommates are out partying, and as you can see, I'm here studying by myself," she said. I felt proud of her for dedicating time to study and practice rather than going out to clubs or somewhere else. I didn't want to go anywhere, I realized. I wanted her here and now. Her nightgown was translucent, revealing parts of her body, and it aroused me. I made another attempt to possess her, and this time I succeeded. She realized resistance was futile and obediently followed my lead. We lay down on the bed, and I began to savor the scent of her body. Every inch of her was under my control. Rebecca was a 25-year-old woman with a very attractive figure, and I realized how much I had missed her warmth and tenderness over the past month. We got down to business. Her loud moans turned me on even more. I don't know how much time passed, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, when I noticed something strange. I saw men's underwear on the nightstand, which clearly wasn't mine. My world crumbled. "Whose are these?" My voice sounded dull. She tried to lie, saying it belonged to her friend's boyfriend, but I saw the lie in her eyes. Then I heard rustling from the closet. I stopped our process and headed towards the closet. Rebecca tried to grab my arm, but I pushed her away, opening the closet door. I found a young man about 10 years younger than me who apparently was that very lover. The world around me ceased to exist. My mind was in complete chaos. Looking at Rebecca, I felt physically ill from the realization of her betrayal. Rebecca started to say something, but her voice was just a squeak to me. I looked at her and then at the guy in the closet. I wanted to wreck the room. I think they saw the anger in my eyes, so when I looked at the guy in the closet, unexpectedly for me, he suddenly started crying and begging for mercy. I didn't bother to confront the lover. I somewhat felt sorry for him, realizing probably my wife was the initiator of their relationship because the guy obviously looked harmless, so I didn't want to touch him. The only thing I asked was his name, and he introduced himself as Joshua Rasmussen. Everything was clear to me. Gathering myself, I silently left the room, leaving behind shattered dreams and a broken heart. The journey home was the longest and loneliest in my life. Rebecca attempted to contact me, but I had already blocked her number. Upon returning home, I immediately contacted someone to gather information about Joshua Rasmussen, and within 2 hours, I received a comprehensive dossier on him. Joshua Rasmussen was a medical college student and was also doing his internship in the same city. He had a disabled mother whom he diligently cared for. I realized that I definitely wouldn't target this person now and needed to focus on what to do about Rebecca. I wanted to divorce her, but I understood that she likely wouldn't let me do so easily. To divorce with minimal losses, I needed to file for divorce and accuse her of marital infidelity, but I had no proof, which was a major problem. Then I hired a private investigator to follow Rebecca. Of course, there were slim chances she would cheat on me, considering I knew her lover, but still, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a year. So I waited. 2 days passed, and the detective informed me that Rebecca was behaving normally and seemed to be planning to return home, which made me realize I needed to act more boldly. I had a backup plan that might seem terrible, but I had no other choice. I waited for Rebecca to come home, and in the meantime, talked to my father and told him everything that had happened and that I was going to divorce Rebecca. "Are you out of your mind? You're in your 30s, and you'll be divorced for the second time with no children, no wife. What will you do next?" The girl made a mistake. It happens to everyone. Why jump straight to divorce? Talk to her first, then decide, my father said, and I felt hurt that he excused my wife's infidelity, dismissing it as a minor mistake. It's a disaster, not a mistake, I decided. That if Rebecca came home and explained the reason for her infidelity to me normally and why she lied while agreeing to the divorce, then I wouldn't do anything bad. But if she starts lying to me again, I can't guarantee what I'll do. 4 days had passed since I learned about my wife's infidelity, and an email arrived from an unknown sender containing plane tickets. It was for a flight tomorrow, and I realized that Rebecca would be returning home tomorrow evening, which was excellent news. I deliberately took the day off and prepared everything for executing my plan. As expected, Rebecca returned in the evening and surprisingly seemed quite cheerful, as if nothing terrible had happened. "Darling, I'm so ashamed. I was so afraid you'd leave me. I've missed you so much. I love you," she said, almost clinging to my neck. Wait. Just because I stayed at home doesn't mean I've forgiven you. This is my home, so I live here. And secondly, I demand an explanation. Why did you cheat on me? I said firmly. Cheat? Didn't you understand? That guy you found in the closet was some kind of crazy, you know. He had health problems, specifically with his head. He was peeping at girls repeatedly, and actually, I should be mad at you for leaving me alone with him in the bedroom, Rebecca said. If I were in a cartoon, my jaw would have dropped to the floor, broken through it, and come out the other side of the earth. I had never been fed such nonsense. How could she cheat on me and then make me out to be the guilty one? I even believed her for a moment and started replaying that evening in my head. So, to extract the information I needed from her, I would proceed with my plan. Really? Are you serious? Sorry. I didn't mean to leave you there alone. So, you didn't cheat on me? I asked. Of course not. How could you think such a thing? Joshua is a harmless guy but with his own quirks. And besides, you saw him. How could I cheat on you with him, she said. And I thought to myself, bravo. Could my wife really think I would believe that the guy in the closet was there by sheer coincidence and she knew nothing about him? It wasn't just by chance. She wanted to get me out of the room in the hotel. We sat for about 20 minutes, and I told Rebecca I had missed her, so I suggested we go to our room. Listen, I have a proposition for you. I want to try sex, but with you blindfolded, I said, thinking I would have to beg her for a long time about it, but she agreed without hesitation. I blindfolded her tightly, and we began to kiss. At that moment, Ralph, a man I had met a few days ago and to whom I had offered money in exchange for having sex with Rebecca, entered our bedroom. During the kissing, I told Rebecca that I needed to remove my jeans, and as I stood making noise, Ralph sat down on the bed next to her, and she continued to kiss and undress with him. I quietly left the room, went to the living room to my laptop, and started to watch what was happening through the surveillance cameras I had previously installed in our bedroom. Rebecca apparently did not feel any difference, thinking she was having sex with another man. I watched the screen, and at some point became scared because I started to like it. At some point, Rebecca decided to remove her blindfold and saw Ralph in front of her, not me. She began to scream and push Ralph away. Ralph quickly left the room, and I entered with Rebecca sitting scared on the bed. See this flash drive in my hands? It has a recording of you having sex with another man. So, if you don't want these frames to end up in court with your parents, friends, and your college professors, you'd better confess everything that happened in the last 2.5 months, I said and sat next to her on the bed. Rebecca was scared. She clearly did not expect such a setup, but I didn't care. I wanted to know the truth, and she began to speak it. First of all, you are an idiot, and secondly, quiet. Let's avoid aggression and go in order. How did you come to cheat? I interrupted her and asked her to tell everything factually. All right. That guy in the closet. Well, I slept with him. It was a couple of times, she said. A couple of times? I interrupted her. Well, not a couple, maybe a bit more, she began. Tell me the exact number, I said, unable to bear it any longer. Well, about 10, maybe 15, she said. How many? I said, not believing her. Well, more than 30 times, she said, satisfied. Wow, continue, I said, astonished. I didn't plan on cheating on you, but the thing is that guy had a sick mother, and he was taking care of her. We met about 2 weeks after I arrived there. I was interested in caring for a sick person, and later I found out he had never had sex or a girlfriend, and I felt sorry for him, she said. Wait, are you saying you slept with him because you felt sorry for him? I interrupted her again. Yes, I felt sorry for him, and we slept together the first time in the hospital and then in the dormitory. But I want you to know that I had no feelings for him. I was indifferent to him, and it's all over between us, she said. It's not over between him and you, it's over between us, I said confidently. I preferred the version where the guy was sick. That evening, she completely disappeared for me. I found it disgusting to look at her, a married woman, cheated out of pity for another man. It even sounds absurd. So, you're going to pack your things now. I'll give you some money so you can rent a hotel. Tomorrow I will prepare the divorce papers and you will have to sign them on my terms, I said decisively. How? Why? I told you the truth. I don't want a divorce, she said. It would have been better if you hadn't cheated, then there wouldn't be a divorce. I can no longer trust or respect you. Sorry, but you are to blame for this, I said, and Rebecca started threatening me, saying she would report to the police that she was coerced into sex. But I quickly silenced her. She was on my hook, she was my puppet. That evening, she packed her things and left for a hotel by taxi. The next day, an angry father called me, accusing me of blackmailing his own wife. I tried to explain the situation to him, but he refused to listen. He said that Rebecca arrived at my parents' house last night, accusing me of blackmail and deceit. I agree that my action was stupid and not reasonable, but Rebecca's action was much more absurd. My father did not want to listen to me and accept me. He declared that he would not let Rebecca sign the divorce papers. Then I decided to take advantage and remember my father's old sins. Dad, okay, you don't have to make concessions to me and defend this cheater as much as you want. But keep in mind that Mom will find out everything about your adventures with young girls a year ago. You probably forgot that I still have photos, right? I said, and my father quickly fell silent and his tone changed. I've been thinking that you're right. We need to divorce the cheater, my father said and hung up. An hour later, a taxi pulled up to my house from which Rebecca got out and signed the divorce papers. This is the right decision. I respect it, I added ironically. Rebecca looked depressed, but I didn't care anyway. I didn't want to leave her completely without anything. The trial took place soon. Rebecca was staying at the hotel in the meantime, and I was paying for her accommodation and food. We got divorced. I sold the house, and we divided the money. I secured that I would help her financially until she graduated or until she found a new boyfriend. I bought a house for myself and continued my normal life, work, home. Only to this, I also added hanging out in clubs. I realized that it means it's too early for me to start a family, and I can still rest. It's been a year since I divorced Rebecca. She came to my house a couple of times, and we had sex. I do not know why, but it was with her that it was the best. I had a lot of one-day girls, but it was not the same with them. So, I often invited Rebecca to my house for an overnight stay. I do not know how bad it is, but I felt good, and this is the most important thing. This story captivates with its drama and unexpected plot twists. It demonstrates how difficult it is to find truth in a world where honesty and betrayal intertwine. The main character is forced to make tough choices, prompting reflection on moral dilemmas and human relationships. Story 2. I am Bruce. Hey, I can go on a business trip for a few months while my wife, Cher, is at home. I never suspected her of anything and always trusted her. I believed in her love and did not want to lose her. And one day, when I returned from a business trip, I was faced with a harsh reality. I will never forget this day in my life. The realization that your spouse has been unfaithful with someone else always comes unexpectedly, and believe me, it happens in various ways. But the way I found out was the most terrible scenario possible. That day was completely ordinary, nothing foreboded trouble, and the weather was nothing special. In the evening, returning home after a business trip, I expected to embrace my wife, Sherry, with whom I had been together for 6 years. But she was not at home. Sherry worked part-time at an insurance company where a new colleague named Lawrence had recently appeared. Her absence didn't alarm me at first, but over time, I began to worry. My concern reached its peak when the doorbell rang. Expecting to see Sherry without her keys, I found 2 police officers at the doorstep. Mr. Bruce Arroyo, one of them asked calmly, confirming. I felt a premonition of trouble enveloping me. The police brought news that was worse than anything I could have imagined. They informed me that Sherry was no longer with us. She had been found dead, pulled from the river. The words of the police officers sounded like a dream, and I cannot reproduce them verbatim. My pain was indescribable. I spent the next few days in tears, praying to a God in whose existence I had never believed about the reasons for such cruelty of fate. I was lost in memories, sorting through Sherry's personal belongings, unable to accept that I would never see them on her again. People tried to console me, but their words sounded hollow. Calling Sherry's parents, who lived abroad, was one of the hardest moments. Just when it seemed it couldn't get any worse, the situation deteriorated further. No one could understand how she ended up in the river that day and why she was in that part of the city at all. The autopsy results showed that before her death, she had taken a large amount of pills, likely sleeping pills. On that day, when the conversation turned to suicide, albeit not directly addressed to me, I found myself confronted by the police at my doorstep. They warned that when I was ready, I would have to come to the station for a talk. Part of me refused to believe that Sherry could take such a step, let alone find any sense in it. Deep down, I still hoped to see her walk through the door with that same enchanting, smiling face I had hopelessly fallen in love with at first sight. After the police left, I finally gathered the strength to open my laptop and check my email. That's when I found the letter next to the laptop, which turned my life upside down even more. It was written by Sherry, clearly visible that the ink was blurred by her tears. My dear beloved husband, by the time you read this, I will be far away. I'm sorry for breaking your heart, but I can no longer live like this. I can't forgive myself for what I've done to our marriage. She talked about that evening when Lawrence kept her after work, supposedly to help with paperwork, but his intentions were different. She tried to resist, but ran out of strength and eventually gave in after he took advantage of her. He showed a video recording, threatening to show everyone if she didn't submit to him again. I came home and cried till morning. I would have told you right away, but you were on a business trip. By the time of your return, Lawrence threatened to expose me to you, our friends, my parents, the whole world. I was alone and couldn't find a way out, so I gave in to his demands. Forgive me, my love. I can no longer bear this and must put an end to it. I won't be able to meet you when you return, and I can't face the world. I pray that you will be able to forgive me for my choice. I hope you find the strength to forgive me and can find someone who deserves to be your wife. With love, sure. There are no words to express what I felt reading this letter. I can't piece my thoughts together, faced with such loss and betrayal. I never dared to go to the police. The thought didn't even cross my mind. Now I understand that if I had acted differently, my story would have unfolded differently. Sitting alone, I remembered our first meeting. Instead of university, I chose a life at sea, joining the merchant navy, and soon found myself on a supertanker lost in the middle of the ocean. The company didn't see it necessary to train the new recruits for long, believing the best way to test us was to throw us into deep water and see whether we would sink or learn to swim. My early years at sea were trials, seasickness, homesickness, and rapidly changing stops at ports around the world. Despite the brief visits, our uniform and salary made us popular among the local women. Though I tried to avoid professionals, my first serious encounter ashore could have ended differently if not for my condition. Then, drunk, I would hardly have noticed the difference. But everything changed when the company found me a new assignment ashore in the technical office. I was pleased with the new career direction, although I was promised the chance to return to the ship if I wanted. But by the third week ashore, I met Sherry at a party. She was unlike the others. Until that moment, I rarely spent a night with a girl without ending up in bed with her, unless I was too drunk or involved in a fight. Sherry was different, and it seems it was she who proposed taking our relationship to a new level. A month later, we decided to go for it, and a year later, our lives were closely intertwined by marital bonds. But after 6 years, everything abruptly ended, and I, wiping away tears, vowed that someone would pay for taking Sherry away from me. In my heart, there was no doubt. There was only one person on whom I could vent my pain. I knew I should have turned to the police, but instead, I found myself standing in front of the door of the insurance company, not knowing how I got there. Ignoring the quizzical looks of the administrator, I headed straight for Lawrence's office, the insurance agent who, it seemed to me, knew more than he said. "What did you do to my wife?" My voice, full of anger, rang out as I met his gaze. Lawrence jumped up, creating a barrier with the table between us, and began to apologize, but I interrupted him. "You were blackmailing her, weren't you?" "This is absurd," he shouted back, insisting that I had no proof. But when I mentioned the letter that could confirm his guilt, Lawrence turned pale. "Let us see what the police have to say," I exclaimed, holding the letter right in front of his face. Something inside me clicked when he tried to attack me. Despite his size advantage, I was more prepared for the fight thanks to experience gained in the harshest corners of the world. He probably hadn't thrown a punch since his school days. Chasing him around the table, I quickly realized that his attempt to hit me was so clumsy that I could easily avoid it. But I didn't dodge. Instead, I countered with punches, knocking him off his feet, and began to deliver further blows. Suddenly, I felt myself being pulled away. The police, drawn by the noise, burst in and dragged me out of the office where I had just beaten Lawrence. Waking up in a cell with pains all over my body and filled with anger, I felt no regret. I yearned for justice for my wife, and despite the absence of a murder, I realized the depth of my hatred for Lawrence. It was the moment when I truly understood what it means to feel aversion towards someone, and although it was a difficult experience, it somehow helped me ease the pain of loss. I always thought that a person has a limited amount of emotions, and now, overwhelmed with sadness after Lawrence was brutally beaten in the hospital, I felt sadness give way to anger. I realized that I might have to pay for my actions, but considering the evidence of Lawrence's blackmail that I had, I comforted myself with the thought that he would suffer even more before the court. This prospect somewhat calmed me until I realized that I had forgotten to make a copy of the important letter from Sure. The moment the police led me out of Lawrence's office, it became clear that without that letter, things would not go in my favor. I convinced myself that the truth would prevail and the evidence would be found, but it did not happen. Seeing Lawrence's condition, I doubted he could avoid the consequences, but his secretary, interrogated by the police, denied seeing the letter. I literally prayed and tearfully pleaded with law enforcement to delve into the situation, but my efforts were in vain. In the end, it came down to his word against mine, and my mental state at the time was questioned. It seemed that the detective believed my words, but without evidence, acknowledging my rightness was impossible, and the case reached a deadlock. Not only did Lawrence decide to press charges against me for assault, but his lawyer also insisted on my detention until the trial, arguing that my freedom posed a threat to his client. In the end, Lawrence was acquitted, even though he had much to worry about, but not his safety. My hatred for him was on the verge of overload, but considering the circumstances, the trial could have turned out worse. I couldn't help but smile seeing Lawrence limping forward to testify, the marks of my blows still visible on his face. He avoided making eye contact with me, while I never looked away. I wonder if that influenced the jury's decision. The prosecution tried to portray me as dangerous because of my interest in boxing, but my attorney pointed out that boxing was merely a school hobby for me and had nothing to do with the case. I thought if boxing caused them concern, what about soccer? After all, it was with my legs that I caused Lawrence the most harm when he tried to hide under a table. Just when my case seemed doomed, something happened that slightly tipped the scales in my favor. This occurred during Lawrence's interrogation when my lawyer inquired about his opinion on my actions against him after I was accused by the prosecution of driving my wife to suicide. Such an accusation was made by the prosecutor, causing a stir in the courtroom. The judge, weighing his words, cautioned my defender to be more careful in his phrasing and ordered the jury to disregard this question. Continuing on this theme, my defender clarified with Lawrence whether he truly believed that my actions were prompted by his pressure on my wife. No sooner had he finished the question than a wave of outrage swept through the courtroom again. It took the judge 10 minutes to restore order, after which he sternly reprimanded my attorney and denied the prosecutor's request for a break, seemingly complicating the situation for the prosecution even further. When it was my turn to testify, the topic once again shifted to my conflict with my late wife's employer. My lawyer presented the question in such a way that I was given the opportunity to share my version of events. Although I had to choose my words carefully, I spoke about a letter from my wife in which she explained the reasons behind her actions, which triggered a new burst of activity from the prosecutor. But the judge quickly put him in his place. In response to the question about the current location of the letter, I said that I had left it in the office of the person before proceeding with the actions for which I am being tried. The judge tried to contain the emotions in the courtroom, but when I began to speak about the reasons for my actions related to my wife's rape and blackmail, the room exploded again. The jury, lawyers, and even some spectators stood up, leading to chaos. At that moment, my lawyer requested a recess, and the judge, seemingly with relief, granted his request, ordering us and the prosecution's lawyers to immediately come to his office. At that point, I realized that I had a chance to change the course of events if only I could keep silent. Eventually, my case in court concluded swiftly without any complications. The judge unapologetically informed the jury that despite my explanations, my confession to the assault placed me outside the law. Without hesitation, the jury found me guilty, but with leniency. To my surprise, the judge sentenced me to 3 months' imprisonment, which wasn't so bad considering I had already served this time in custody. The event caused a wide resonance in the press, but I had to accept the warning that any careless statements could bring me back to court later. Blower's reputation was tarnished, and his business collapsed within 6 months. I am satisfied with the outcome, deciding that Lawrence wasn't worth the risk of murder. 3 months in jail was a serious lesson for me. I realized I didn't want to return there. I forgave Sherry, realizing that holding a grudge against her was pointless. She acted thoughtlessly, leaving me alone, but I decided not to hold a grudge against those who revealed my secrets. Although I didn't plan to take any action, a year later, I was glad to return to my previous job, though I felt somewhat uncomfortable there, especially in the first year. Blower, despite everything, managed to open a new office, but I hadn't forgotten his past actions and decided he deserved a lesson. One winter evening, I waited for him outside his office. Though he couldn't be sure of my identity, I had an alibi. I could have caused him serious harm, but chose to limit myself to a lesson. The police questioned me, but I had a solid alibi as I was spending time with friends on a ship. Over time, I began to wonder if I really liked the person I had become. Life was at a standstill, and I didn't know what would happen next. Realizing it was time to make a radical change in my life, I decided that I needed to immerse myself in the expanse of the sea once again. This decision surprisingly brought relief among my office colleagues, who seemed tired of my constant unfulfilled promises. It was clear to me that it was time to seek a psychologist's help and rid myself of the obsession with revenge that was gradually destroying my life. The hatred for this person whom I greatly disliked harmed me more than his own actions. The sea seemed like an easy path to salvation, but life as usual had other plans. Everything changed a few days before my trip to Kuwait, my 4th that year. Walking down the street, I suddenly came face to face with him, with Lawrence. "Where are you off to?" he growled, standing just 3 steps away from me. "Lost," I retorted, stepping back as he moved towards me. "You'll pay, Arayo," he threatened, and at that moment, all my good intentions vanished like smoke. He was right in front of me, unaware of my plans, and I was ready to use that to my advantage. He made a clumsy lunge, which I dodged, looking around for witnesses to our confrontation. He tried to hit me again, and I dramatically responded to his blow, remembering my brief boxing training. His next punch caught me off guard, causing me to throw my head back in pain. Almost instinctively, I delivered a left hook straight to his face, feeling something pop under my fist. Then I tried to land a right hook to his unprotected chin, but missed, hitting lower than I intended and missing the target by several inches. Missing his chin, I struck directly at his throat. The sensation, as if I had crushed his larynx, was indescribable. He fell to the ground, clutching his neck, making terrible coughing sounds. I was ready to deliver another blow, this time to the most painful spot, but at the last moment, I stopped, thinking about the consequences. With so many witnesses around, he's not worth it, I thought, and walked away. An hour later, I found myself at the police station, filing a report, including the names and addresses of 5 witnesses to his attack on me. At the court, where his friends were present, I testified against him. I dreamed of him receiving a life sentence, but in the end, the court only gave him 3 months on probation. This verdict didn't surprise me, but somehow, it softened my outrage, although it didn't completely destroy my hatred. The desire for revenge became less acute. I began to convince myself that despite his actions leading to my wife's suicide, he hadn't intended such an outcome. My guilt for not being home that night when she returned also began to gnaw at me. However, deciding that my hatred was eating away at me from the inside, I sought help from a psychologist. This person, not among the expensive specialists, but with rich life experience, advised me to overcome grief and hatred. I needed to forgive my offender. If I didn't, I would remain unhappy. Following his advice, I realized that forgiveness had to be personal, and I decided to meet him face to face. It wasn't easy, but the advice proved to be correct. It took 3 days to find him, and by then, he was already working in an office handling car insurance claims after losing his license due to the conviction. This step helped me find peace and move on with my life. He clearly wasn't eager to meet with me, but I managed to convince him otherwise. So we found ourselves face to face on neutral territory, choosing a secluded bench in a park. We sat, avoiding direct eye contact, both wishing to end this uncomfortable interaction as soon as possible. My psychologist insisted that I forgive you. I blurted out, the words stuck in my throat, but I was determined to say them and disappear. He was astonished to hear this. I forgive you, I said, trying to make the words sound more convincing with repetition. I know what you did to my wife, but I forgive you. Why? Because I need to move forward, I explained, though inside, I felt that this wouldn't solve all my problems. His reaction was staggering. He laughed at my words, claiming he had been with her only once and that, as he put it, was far from memories of a pleasant evening. I exerted all my effort to maintain composure, tightly holding onto the bench or his armrests to prevent myself from lunging at him. Arroyo, he laughed, she wasn't even good at that. These words were the last straw, and I lost control. Although I sought forgiveness at the beginning of the meeting, his words unleashed a storm of emotions in me, and I gave in to my fists. I remember how he begged for mercy when I hit him and his screams as I continued to beat him. The details of that moment have faded from my memory, but I left him there on the bench and walked away without looking back. Days later, I was heading to my ship, bound for Saudi Arabia, and would have been surprised to find out that I made it without being arrested. I was never questioned or even contacted about the murder of Lawrence. Yes, you heard right. Brandon Bernard, the local troublemaker, came under suspicion. Everything became clear when it was revealed that Mr. Bernard, who worked at the same insurance company as the victim, could link him to the crime. Hearing the news of a body found in the park, I was shocked, realizing that the press got it right this time. The case with Bernard caused a real stir. He openly confessed to shooting, claiming that the victim indeed deserved his fate. However, the case took an unexpected turn when one of the forensic experts stated that the victim might have been dead before Bernard shot him. This opinion was contested by another authoritative expert, sparking debates on the credibility of such claims. Bernard, realizing that being charged with killing a dead man was unlikely, told a compelling story of his search for the victim, whom he allegedly found lying motionless in the park. He added that he saw a man running away with a non-European appearance, describing him as dark-skinned, about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with a limp. Considering I am several inches taller with a different skin color and no issues with mobility, his words made me think, was his story fabricated or was he trying to indirectly thank me by giving a false description? Now I will never know for sure, but I am grateful that his story threw the investigation off track and made the press speculate about the mysterious stranger. Messages about the mysterious man poured in from across the country, sparking discussions about immigration policy. Eventually, the murder charge was downgraded to manslaughter, then to assault with aggravating circumstances and illegal possession of a weapon, leading to a 9-month sentence with the possibility of early release for good behavior. But Bernard's story didn't end there, although that's another story not related to me. I could not be sure whether I killed the victim or not, but it was enough for me to know that I fulfilled my promise to avenge Sherry without feeling like a murderer. My hatred dissipated unexpectedly, just as the psychologist predicted. Over the years, I continued my life, became an assistant captain, found new love, and had children who became my everything. But from time to time, my thoughts returned to Sherry, wondering what if her life had not been cut short so early. Although I sought comfort in my new family, deep down, I still missed Sherry. This story emphasizes the complexity of the forgiveness process and its liberating power. It also reflects the importance of searching for inner peace and finding ways to reconcile with the past in order to move forward and find joy in life.